Hi, I'm George. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome to Rio de Janeiro. Today I'm here on Praia Vermelha. Behind me we have the iconic Sugarloaf Mountain with the cable cars going up to the top. It's quite cloudy up there, so I decided to not go up there today as you probably don't get much of a view. So I'm going to paint this view, paint the trees in the foreground, some of the sea, some of the waves and the rocks, and then some of the Sugarloaf Mountain, which is covered in quite an atmospheric, misty cloud, which I think will look quite nice. It kind of pushes it back a bit further. So it's a very small beach that's next to the military base here in Rio de Janeiro. And anyway, I'm excited to start painting, so remember to please subscribe to my channel, and let's get into this video.
So here I'm applying imprimatura to the canvas, so a slightly warm under layer that I'm going to paint on top of. So I apply raw umber paint using my palette knife to the surface of the painting, and then using my kitchen roll and a bit of terps, I just rub it in all over the surface of the painting so the whole area is covered with this warm undertone. One of the advantages of painting with an imprimatura is it adds a harmony to your painting, as you don't have glaring areas of white breaking through in certain areas that the brush hasn't completely covered. So if any areas do break through, I'll have this sort of warm browny colour to it. Also, it helps you see the values more accurately. For example, if I tried to paint a light paint down onto the white of the panel before I put any tone down, this tone may end up looking a bit dark when I first put it down. And similarly, if I put down another tone which is a mid-tone, this tone will also look quite dark. Whereas if I put a mid-tone down already, then the lights will look light and the darks will still look dark, rather than having some tones look a lot darker because I'm comparing them to the white of the canvas. So in this sense, it helps me see the values more accurately when I paint them down onto the painting. So I'd suggest doing this. I don't always do it, but especially if you want to paint quite quick, having this tone in place will help you, as that glaring white of the canvas, which can be a bit intimidating, won't be too distracting when you paint and when you analyse the values in your painting. And now I'm going in with this colour for the clouds. Now if you look at the photo, which is basically showing the scene that I'm painting, the sky looks just very white. But when I'm looking at the scene completely from life, I do see a lot of variety in temperature. Some of the clouds are a lot cooler and have a sort of purpley, grey, bluey tone. And then some of the other areas are a lot lighter and have a slightly warmer tone as they're picking up some of the sunlight. So that is one of the nice advantages of painting from life, is whereas photos often completely compress the values and can make the sky look pure white, when you're actually there looking into the sky, you can see all these different variations in colour, in temperature and in value. However, I am trying to keep the values in the sky quite close together, although there is different variations in the temperature and subtle variations in value shifts. I'm not making these differences too big, as overall the sky is an area of light, so I don't want to make the clouds too dark. Here, using my palette knife, I'm making a mix on my palette for Sugarloaf Mountain, which sits behind the trees. And to make this mix, I'm using quite a bit of titanium white, some ultramarine blue, some raw umber, which is a yellowy brown, and a bit of alizarin crimson, which is quite a purpley red. And by mixing all of these together on the palette, I create quite an accurate value and colour for the mountain behind the trees. I also mix an intermediate mix between the sky and the mountain, as in order to paint the soft transition where the clouds come over the top of the mountain and create that sort of atmospheric softness as the mountain disappears, I use this intermediate mix between the sky and the mountain to create that really nice soft edge. So here I'm getting more specific with the edges of the cloud in front of the mountain and also with the contour of the mountain. So I'm really trying to look for areas where the contour is completely lost and other areas where this contour is quite a bit sharper. Here I'm sketching in using quite thin down paint some of those dark areas on that big bunch of trees which sits in front of the mountain. So here I'm painting in the trees which sit on the same plane as Sugarloaf Mountain, and in order to make them recede and to add this effect of depth in the scene and to add a bit of clarity between the levels of the painting, I add quite a bit of titanium white and really grey down this green so that it's quite a dull green, it doesn't have really any chroma in. Here I'm mapping in the area of the sea and I'm using quite a big brush and I'm painting down the broad value and colour. Once I have this area covered, I can then go in with more details and subtler shifts in colour and value. So this darker area in the foreground is caused by the trees reflecting into the water, and for this reason it has a greener hue, whereas the general colour for the sea is a sort of bluey grey as it's reflecting the sky. So as I paint this mass of trees which sits in front of Sugarloaf Mountain, I am adding more detail and contrast between the light and the dark areas of the trees than I did when I was painting the trees which are on the same level of Sugarloaf Mountain, as these trees are further away, so I'm trying to create more atmospheric perspective to push those ones back, whereas these trees which sit in the midground of the painting are closer and therefore more in focus. So as I add these variations in light and dark, I'm using two different mixes on my palette. One which is the light mix which has more yellow and is slightly warmer, and the dark mix which has a bit more blue and a bit more raw umber mixed into the mix, making it darker and cooler. However, as I paint these trees, I'm still squinting at them and analysing the values in relation to the whole scene. Although there are some areas of the leaves which are getting more light and are therefore brighter, I'm making certain these lights aren't too bright and don't compete with, say, the light of the sky or the light of the sand, as this mass of trees is still quite dark on the value range. I'm now going in with my lightest light and painting the white froth of the waves which are crashing onto the beach. So one of my tips for painting waves from life is just to take a moment to really observe the cycle of the waves and pick a point which you think looks interesting and works with the composition that you like, and make up your mind and decide to paint the waves in that way. And as the waves are repetitive, you can start painting and then look up again and wait till the waves do that thing that you liked and then paint that down again, and just continue this process. As if you try and paint completely from observation, just looking at the waves as they keep moving, it can be very frustrating, and sometimes the movement of the waves won't make sense in the painting. So it's good to make up your mind and pick a particular moment, and obviously you can change it a bit if you see some effects which the waves are doing which look nice, or some effects in the water, then you can add this in. But in general, I make my mind up before I start painting the waves and then stick to this pattern as I continue painting. And here I'm refining the detail in the rocks. So to paint these rocks, I'm pretty much just using two mixes of paint, two values. One for the dark accents the area of the rock which is in shadow, which is facing away from the light, and on the areas of the rocks which are facing upward and towards the sky, so therefore getting a lot more light, I'm using a different mix which has more titanium white and is also a bit colder than the mix I've used in the shadows. Now I'm going in with quite a small, fine filbert brush just to pick out some of the smaller details and shapes within the trees. and I'm painting some of the shapes that the leaves are creating, and I'm also trying to be more specific, especially with the contour of the trees. So up where the tree meets the sky, I'm trying to pick out some of those shapes to give a very accurate impression of the leaves on the tree. I'm still not going as far as painting every leaf that I can see when I really look into the tree. I'm still trying to keep them as blocks of light, blocks of mid-tone, and then blocks of shadow. But if I can get the overall shape that the leaves are creating correct, and then paint in some of the finer details on the edges of these shapes that the leaves are creating, I can create an accurate impression of the trees. So now I'm painting the last area of the painting to be resolved, which is the sand in the foreground. And as the sand is lighter than the imprimatura colour, I'm painting quite a lot of thick paint on top of this. However, I am going to try and keep this imprimatura showing through in a few areas, as I do like this warm orangey brown just breaking through the paint in a few areas, as adds some vibrancy to the foreground. Also, I always find there's a small strip of wet sand in between the waves and the dry sand. I find this area quite fun to paint. You can get a lot of colour variety in it, as the sand being wet, this makes the sand go a darker oranger colour, but also due to the sand being wet, it tends to reflect the sky, so you can get some really nice blues and often purpley blues that are reflecting the sky. And if you get the colour and the value right, you create a really nice shiny appearance, and you can really capture the texture of this wet sand. And now I'm just painting in some small people into the scene, as the beaches in Rio de Janeiro always have people on no matter what the weather. And I'm also picking out their reflections into this wet section of sand, and by adding in this small reflection, it also helps contribute to the appearance of this sand being wet. I also like painting people into the scene, as everybody is familiar with the size of a person, whereas you may not be familiar with the size of Sugarloaf Mountain. So by putting that person in the scene, it adds scale to the scene. It also adds a narrative to the painting as well, and another reason I like adding people and birds is it does add some life, and also adds other areas of visual interest. There's quite a lot of different things to look at, and in that sense I find it makes the painting a bit more exciting.
So I hope you enjoyed that video of me painting here in Praia Vermelha in Rio de Janeiro. I really enjoyed painting here. We were quite lucky with the weather, it didn't rain, and this is a slightly bigger scale than what I normally paint on, but I actually enjoyed it. I could get some smaller details in, such as the small birds and things. I had some fun with that, whereas if you paint on a small scale, sometimes the brushes just don't allow you to paint small details in, as the painting's already quite small. I also had some fun painting some people in, getting quite a lot of colour variety to the waves, and I'm happy with it. I think I'm going to paint on this scale more often as well. If you enjoyed that, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on Instagram at George Frederick Thomas. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.